Hey everybody, looks like we're live again for another action-packed adventure water testing in the home. What's going on, people? All right, so this test, let's see, we've already covered pH, millivolts, temperature, and TDS, and its temperature. And now we're moving into total chlorine. Now, what you need to know about total chlorine is it may not be the test for you, but it is for me. The only way to know is to get a hold of your local water treatment facility if you're in a city or in a town or township where somebody else is managing the incoming water supply for you that's delivered into your home or your building for your business. If you're on your own in a rural community, maybe you have an aquifer or groundwater or some sort of water recovery that you get like from the rainwater. So you probably have some sort of chlorination method that you're using. But some municipalities, you need to understand this, there's a growing percentage across the country where municipalities start working with a mixture of chlorine and ammonia. And when they do this, I think it's a cost-cutting measure. It might be easier for them to get the water where they need it to be, but it's a little tougher on everybody else that's on the receiving end of chloramine water versus chlorinated water. Chlorinated water is already the lesser of two evils, and I write about that in my book in phase 1 for the Trident Water Treatment Defense System. But and here's actually a section of my research that I documented, and I will just tell you that there is growing awareness in the medical community about the bad side effects of being exposed to chlorinated water, not immediately, but over a lifetime. Where maybe it kicks in, and in some cases it's actually immediate, unfortunately. Sadly, Taiwan has found that 400,000 in a study that they did, 400,000 expectant mothers gave birth to congenital affected symptoms of their new child, like the cleft kids that have that horrible disfigurement right at birth. For people that are older, they have traced chlorine as being a big major contributor to people in their urinary tract system as far as the bladder and also rectally. So it's hard on the kidneys, it's hard on the digestive system, and the waste mechanism of that, as well as carrying children. So one of the cool things that you need to know about reverse osmosis is the second stage is typically to remove chlorine. We talked about a CTO filter, chlorine, taste, and odor. Well, chlorine has its own taste and odor, but it also is removing, not masking, but actually removing other foul odors. And if you've ever lived in the country, you know that some of that smell is like sulfur or rotten eggs or something like that. It's bad. But by design, you need that filter, the CTO filter, to be on point every time, and you never want to neglect it, because as soon as you do, your system gets overrun with chlorinated water or chloramine water. It will absolutely kill your stage 3 reverse osmosis membrane, which is the treatment that is what you're really paying for. You know, it's kind of interesting. The cheapest filters start at the pre-filter or stage 1 and 2 stage in the process, and then all of a sudden you get to stage 3 where it's the reverse osmosis membrane, which is a very interesting media. It's a thin film composite, or TFC, and if chlorine hits that, it absolutely kills it, and it will not do what it was designed to do, which is why you want to have these frequent checkups throughout the year, right? Maybe every quarter or once a month if you're in a harder hit area where you know the water is like pool water. My wife and I have been on filtered and finished water that has been conditioned and purified since the mid-90s, and boy, I'll tell you right away, if we don't have some sort of bottled water substitute, if we're traveling, for example, you'll see me throughout these videos drinking from my own reusable water like this. And we do that with our water so that we don't have to buy the bottled water. We'll still pick up some for those emergencies, like when we're away from home where we can't get our sourced water directly. But if I'm working in the home, or I know that I'm going to be out and about locally, I may pack on 2 or 3 of these just to hold me over for the day if it's economically and sensible and reasonable to do. But if I'm at a venue, for example, where they won't allow me to bring something in, then I got to hunker down and pay $4 for 16 ounces or 17 and a half ounces of whatever water they got from Sam's or Costco or wherever they get it. But, bottled water. And I hate, even getting that, but sometimes that's what you got to do. I mean, if you're stranded and you don't have a safe water supply after a major storm event, you need that bottled water. Okay, so I'm not 100% down with bottled water. We buy it by the case as well, but we also put it inside of our cars, especially if we're carting around grandchildren and they happen to be picked up from school or something and we have to go someplace else. They're very convenient, but just know that every second there's something like 1,200 of those plastic bottles being contributed to landfills and waste and negatively impacting the ecosystem and the environment that surrounds that ecosystem, and wildlife and water life and in our lives. And there's places on the other side of the planet that illegally, if they can't, if it can't be recycled, and most of it cannot, if it makes that crinkly sound and you can see through it, really that is just waste. So don't even buy into the notion that it's recyclable, because it really isn't. It might be repurposed and it might be reusable for some other purpose, but it's not going to break down anytime soon in a landfill situation. And that's why you hear these horrible stories about, wildlife that is impacted by the trash. But there is some organizations, corporations, entities elsewhere on the international theater that actually, if it can't be buried because it's an island or someplace that's just not feasible, they'd have to drive hundreds of miles away to the next landfill or something. They just illegally burn it. And then that plastic atomizes as well as the carcinogenic toxics that it wreaks. And then that falls out of the atmosphere and people start breathing it. And those local people in a village or city or township ends up getting irritation in their respiration system, or the respiratory system, I should say. And they end up getting cancer because you can't process that stuff out of the lungs. That's the problem with it. So it's bad for the land, it's bad for the air, it's bad for water, waterways, rivers, deltas, the oceans, all of that. It's just bad, bad, bad. So minimize as much as you possibly can try to remove plastic water bottles from your daily life, if at all possible. Now, I know there are, municipalities like Detroit that actually just crate this stuff in and distribute it daily, I think, or a few times a week for the general population, because they can't even bathe, they can't even create food prep or make formula for their infant child with the tap water because of the lead exposure. So that's what they got to do, or they move out, or they take their chances with the lead exposure, which is not a good thing to bathe in, wash your hands in, brush your teeth in. This is the world that we live in, and then we discover these things after the fact. So I want to tell you about 5 different types of chlorine, and we may have to break up this video, but I just wanted to mention them real quickly. The following information covers the differences in types of chlorine, and this is in my book that I wrote where I documented my research. They are, number 1 is added chlorine, the initial chlorinated concentrate added to the water source. So that would be the municipal water supply or your well system as it pumps the water in from your well water source, which we would consider raw, influent water. Then you're adding and metering in with pellets or some sort of mechanism to get that chlorination into the water before it gets distributed to the rest of the house as a potable water supply, which is drinkable and safe for human consumption, and animals, I should say. Again, it's the lesser of two evils. Without having chlorinated water, you probably wouldn't live as long as you live because of the microorganisms that chlorine actually kills in raw water. So, but it's still not the best situation for a scenario. Type number 2 is chlorine demand. That's chlorine that reacts to organic material, trace metals, and other compounds that are present before disinfection treatment. Okay. The third one is called total chlorine, and that's actually what I'm going to be testing for today because I know that we don't have a chloramine water treatment facility. And so total chlorine is the remaining chlorine level of concentrate that follows after chlorine demand of water. In other words, after it's killed off all the bugs and organic material and has settled down in my copper pipes internally, as well as the water delivery system, service water delivery pipes that go from the water treatment facility to every home and business in our metropolis in Colorado Springs. After it has dealt with all that, how much chlorine do I have left in the water, for good or bad, right? I need to know these things. So we'll be testing the tap first and then followed by the RO system so that you can see the differences and how well my system is removing or how badly it's not removing the chlorine, and it's time to start changing out and upgrading my filter replacements and upgrade the system. Okay. Combined chlorine is the chlorine concentrate combined with nitrogen in the water and unavailable for disinfection. So a lot of times you can see that, like if you're more into the hot tub spas and pool systems, you have a different type of chemistry need, and sometimes you get the ammonia going on, and so that takes away what the free chlorine is. And speaking of free chlorine, that's the final of the 5 types. It's a concentrate of chlorine remaining as an available reserve for water treatment disinfection. Okay, so what I have for us today is, through my research, I picked up a system from Hanna Instruments, and that's Hanna with 2 N's, and This is, and I'll just kind of put this here where you can actually make it out. Make sure that you can focus and read that. This is a handheld colorimeter for total chlorine. That's what it says there. And it's going to be this little instrument that I'm about to use. You should also note that this has a total chlorine reagent included that's got some iodine, and so you want to be very careful working with this chemical. So I've worked with it so long that I'm not wearing gloves for this exercise, but just notice that you could put on personal protection equipment, face mask, eye goggles, and then your neoprene gloves, okay? Now, it comes in a hard shell case, and it's a beauty. And I will open it up here. First off, it has the instruction manual inside of it, and it's got a quick taking measurements, which is what I'm going to step through to show what's going on here. And it's making a special call out to make sure you don't have bubbles in the actual solution that you're testing, because a colorimeter is actually using light, and it's making a measurement based on the illumination, I should say, of how clear that is or not clear. And that will help measure accurately what the total chlorine is. These are the vials. They're 10 milliliters each, and I don't know if you can see that under that, but I'm going to try to put that there for you. But it's got a line up here where you fill up to. That's 10 milliliters, okay? And then there's a second one if you want to use that, and we probably should just go ahead and use one for each sample. So what I'm going to do is have one for tap water, and the other one is going to be for my reverse osmosis water test, okay? So that means I'm going to need 2 reagents, and they come with a handful of reagents in a Ziploc baggie. And so I'm going to tear off a second one, and then we'll leave this back in the sealed bag. Again, we just put that in there. Now, you'll notice I'm running low on that because I've tested more than one time. This is the actual reagent reorder, and it's actually, let's see there if you can read that. You have to understand I'm looking at this upside down so that you can see it right ways. So it's a H, it's either HI or H1. Nope, it's HI 711-25. So there are 25 more reagents in this box. As you can see, they're all stuffed in there. They look like little disposable alcohol pads that you would swab with, but they're not. So do not confuse them. That's why you want to keep all this stuff together, stored with your water testing equipment in chemistry. Then this is the actual unit itself, and you just basically end up opening it and following the directions that it gives you on the front side. So you can actually see it's already saying C1, which is the first step, and inside there's going to be a light that happens when we press, and a countdown. So you get the first test as is, then you add the actual reagent by cutting it. On the back side, you can see the little hash marks with scissors that you would actually use that for, okay? And then that gets poured into the 10 milliliter that you already tested as C1, then you press it for C2, and then there's a 2.5 minute countdown. And then after that, you look for your reading, and that'll tell you in parts per million how much total chlorine you have. Hanna Instruments has the other type of testing. There's a free chlorine, like the types we were talking about, what's left, what's available. And I believe that you may need to have both the total chlorine and the free chlorine to come up with a formula that actually ascertains what your chloramine level should be, because it's basically having to offset the ammonia that is mixed with chlorine in the chloramine solution from your water treatment facility. Okay? So, looks like we're going to need to charge that phone here for that camera. I don't want to open that yet, so what I'm going to do, is I'm going to come over a little out of camera here and turn on my tap water, and I'm going to fill it to that 10 milliliter. Now I overshot par here, so I'm actually just going to flick it into my sink until I see it hit, and that was a little too much flick. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of practice, and that's pretty doggone close. I think I can live with that. And it's right, so it's got a line right there for the 10 milliliters, and I'm right on it. Okay. Now, again, the special call out in the directions is you want to make sure that you don't have a bunch of bubbles in the vial, the 10 milliliter vial. And this is actually called a cuvette, not a Corvette. I'm driving points home, but not using General Motors product. Okay, so when I look at it in the dark against the light, I really don't see tiny bubbles. But there are times of the year where the water gets cold enough that it is creating a reverse condensation effect where it's air bubbles instead of droplets of water. So it's because of the hot and cold. At any rate, so this is my tap water. We're going to do that test first. I'm going to press the button here one time, and it's going to say add C1, and it's got a flashing press. Okay, so what that means is I need to open this container and set the vial in, and then snap it shut, and then press. Okay, and now it's saying to add C2. And if you can see that, so it says add C2 and then press again. So this is where we take it out. So it gets a baseline reading basically. And I'm just going to tap this to get all the contents down at the bottom corner. And I'm going to cut following the dashes on this foil pouch with a little curve. This is kind of fun. And then take it all the way to the back end. And so what you end up with is the foil pouch, and it has a little bit of white powder. Okay, and then what you can do is just, take off the cap, set it down, and I like to pour it over a sink kind of thing just to make sure, but make sure that it gets in the jar, and it's coming out like salt. Okay, and I feel like I got it pretty good, and I'm not breathing any dust fumes or anything like that. Okay, then I'm going to put the cap on it, and it says to replace the cap and shake gently for 20 seconds. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. This is fun. There was a real snappy tune back in the 60s. Dun, 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 dun. Intermission. Okay. Or you can just sing happy birthday. I think it's about 20 seconds as well, according to the hand washing people. Then I'm going to put that in. Oh. And I waited too long in my explanation, so I got to do this again. Doggone it. Well, looks like what we're going to have to do is get a new baseline. So I'm going to use the second vial and get it to my number 10 milliliter line. I'm going to press and hold and clear this completely blank. Now I'm going to make sure there's no bubbles and no water droplets on the outside, because it would just magnify and work against us when it's trying to illuminate. Kind of like a prism. All right. Prison, not prison. Enunciation matters. Okay, so I'm going to close the lid, press the button, wait for my flashing press. There it is. Now I can open. I put in my tap water. I press C1. Press the button. Okay. We're just waiting for a reading. Okay, so now we got our reading. It says to add C2. So I'm going to say as a best practice, go ahead and fill one, and then the one with the additive, have it on the go here. Now I can press C2. And I believe it said to press and hold the button until the timer's displayed. No, that didn't work. Okay, let's try that again. So I'm going to close that again. You got to get a rhythm. So I'm going to press this so it gets the darkness baseline or brightness baseline. Put in my tap water sample, C1, press. It's going to take about 15 seconds, 10, 15 seconds. There we go. Take that out. Now I'm putting in my C2 sample. Close, press, and hold. And there's my 2.5 minute countdown. Okay, so I'm just going to set this down. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's counting down. Okay, so in my book, I actually talk about the differences in an algorithm, the way that it's actually broken out. So you can actually see, and I will center that a little better, but you can see where chlorine's added, the initial chlorine concentration added to water, then there's a chlorine demand. It has reactions with organic material and materials and other compounds present in the water prior to disinfection. If it isn't dealing with that, then you have something called total chlorine, which is the remaining chlorine concentration and chlorine demand of water. Then off to this side, you have free chlorine, which is concentration of chlorine available for disinfection. And then you have this combined chlorine for a concentration of chlorine combined with nitrogen in the water and unavailable for disinfection. So there's a whole section here that I have, and this was adapted by the Chlorine Residual Testing Fact Sheet from the CDC and a SWS project. That's page 233. That's about 200 100 pages away. Yeah, let's see here. So I'll come back to this because this camera just decided to go to sleep. And I'm going to hit the sharpness button so that you can actually see it again. Total chlorine added, chlorine demand, total chlorine, free chlorine, and combined chlorine. You can actually see that in my phase 1 water testing treatment on page 233 of a 430 plus reference manual that I've written for my students. Okay, now let's see how we're doing. Looks like we got about 5 seconds left for the timer, and our survey says our ppms is 0. Yay us. Okay, I'm okay with that. That means my system for water treatment is removing the chlorine from the city water, and that means that we're not breathing the chlorine fumes in and causing a respiratory issue that we're going to have to deal with both now and in the future. And you know who else gets affected by that is the people in the hot tubs and the people that exercise through aquatic exercises such as swimming. That completes our total chlorine reading. Again, I got this nice sporty 0.00 chlorine parts per million, and I'm just going to go with that. There is no point in testing further to see a difference when I can get those kind of readings. So this is Mike Rogers again with Daily Living with Water and All Things Water Treatment Academy. So the next thing that we're going to actually test is actual water hardness. So I look forward to seeing you in the very next video. Take care. Bye now.